The story of Abraham and Isaac is one of the most powerful and dramatic narratives in human history. It is a story of faith, obedience, and an unimaginable test, a journey that would not only define the legacy of one man, but shape the destiny of an entire nation. Abraham, often called the father of faith, was given a promise that seemed impossible, that he would become the father of a great nation, despite his old age and Sarah's barrenness. But just when that promise seemed fulfilled through the miraculous birth of Isaac, God presented Abraham with a test so severe that it defied human understanding. He was commanded to sacrifice his beloved son, the very child through whom God had promised to bless the world. Why would God demand such a thing? How did Abraham respond? And what must Isaac have felt as he followed his father to the place of sacrifice, carrying the wood for his own execution? These questions have captivated the minds and hearts of believers for generations, making this one of the most profound and deeply personal stories in the Bible. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 2. To fully grasp the depth of this narrative, we must first set the stage in ancient Mesopotamia, a world where people worshipped many gods, where child sacrifice was not uncommon, and where tribal clans sought the favor of divine beings for survival and prosperity. In this context, Abraham's calling was radical. He was chosen by the one true God to leave behind everything he knew and embark on a journey of faith, guided solely by divine promises. God told him, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation." With no roadmap, no assurances, and no visible proof, Abraham obeyed. His life became a journey of trust, where each step required complete reliance on God's voice. It was in this journey that Isaac was born, a miraculous child, a fulfillment of God's covenant, and the long-awaited answer to years of prayers and tears. But just as everything seemed settled, just as Abraham finally saw the promise materialize, God tested him in a way that would push his faith to the ultimate limit. This is not just a story of history, it is a lesson for all of humanity. A lesson about trust, obedience, and the deep mysteries of God's plans. Join us as we uncover every moment of this extraordinary journey, leaving no detail untold. Abraham's journey of faith began with a single command that would change the course of history. In Genesis 12, verses 1 to 7, God spoke to him with a divine call that required absolute trust. "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." At the time, Abraham, then known as Abram, was living in Ur of the Chaldeans, a wealthy and developed city in Mesopotamia. His family worshipped multiple gods, and life was stable. Yet, God called him out of everything familiar, asking him to leave behind his homeland, his relatives, and the security of his past to follow a promise with no visible guarantee. It was a radical act of faith, one that set Abraham apart from all others of his time. With that command came a profound promise. "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." God's words carried a weight that went beyond just personal gain. It was a divine plan to establish a people through whom all the nations of the earth would be blessed. But there was an apparent contradiction. Abraham and his wife Sarah at the time had no children, and they were already advanced in age. How could a man in his 70s with a barren wife become the father of a great nation? God's promise required unwavering faith, and Abraham responded with obedience. Without questioning, without demanding proof, he took Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all his possessions and set out for Canaan, the land God had promised to show him. This journey was not a small task. Abraham was not simply relocating. He was leaving behind his entire identity, his people, and his heritage to embrace an unseen future. Traveling across the ancient lands of Mesopotamia, Abraham and his family faced uncertainty, harsh conditions, and the constant need to trust God's guidance. When they arrived in Canaan, God reaffirmed his promise, telling Abraham, "To your offspring I will give this land." At that moment, Abraham built an altar to worship God, marking the land as sacred ground. This was the first of many acts of worship that defined Abraham's relationship with God. Unlike the nations around him that built temples to many gods, Abraham worshipped the one true God, trusting in his promise alone. As the years passed, however, Abraham and Sarah struggled with doubt. They had obeyed God, left their homeland, and settled in Canaan, but there was still no child. Abraham was growing older, and Sarah remained barren. The promise of becoming a great nation seemed increasingly impossible. In Genesis 15, God appeared to Abraham once more, sensing the burden of his doubts. Abraham cried out to him, saying, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless?" This was a moment of raw honesty. Abraham had followed God faithfully, but the delay in the fulfillment of the promise tested his faith. In response, God reassured him with one of the most beautiful and prophetic declarations in Scripture. He took Abraham outside and told him to look up at the night sky, saying, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be." In that moment, under the vast canopy of stars, Abraham chose to believe. The Bible tells us, Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. This was a defining moment of faith, one that would later be echoed in the New Testament as the foundation of justification by faith. Abraham did not demand immediate proof. He simply trusted God's word, and that trust was counted as righteousness. However, the waiting continued. As time passed, Sarah and Abraham wrestled with their human limitations. The years of barrenness, aging, and longing tested their patience. Sarah, in particular, struggled with the weight of disappointment. She had borne the shame of infertility, and as she aged, hope seemed to fade. The promise was there, but the reality of their circumstances made it hard to believe. Their doubt eventually led them to take matters into their own hands. Instead of waiting for God's timing, Sarah suggested that Abraham have a child through Hagar, her Egyptian servant. This practice was not unusual in ancient times. If a wife was barren, it was customary for her servant to bear children on her behalf. Abraham agreed, and Hagar conceived a son named Ishmael. For a moment, it seemed like the problem was solved. But this was not God's intended fulfillment of the promise. The birth of Ishmael led to conflict, jealousy, and tension between Sarah and Hagar, foreshadowing the ongoing struggle between their descendants. Despite this detour, God remained faithful to his original promise. In Genesis 17, when Abraham was 99 years old, God appeared again and reaffirmed his covenant. "I will bless Sarah and will surely give you a son by her. She will become the mother of nations." This time, Abraham's reaction was laughter. The idea of a 99-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman having a child was so impossible that Abraham fell on his face and laughed. But God confirmed his word, saying, "Your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac." The name Isaac means "he laughs," a reminder of both Abraham's and Sarah's reaction to the miraculous promise. Sarah, too, laughed in disbelief when she overheard the prophecy. In Genesis 18, when 3 divine visitors came to Abraham's tent and announced that Sarah would conceive within a year, she laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" But God responded with a question that echoed through time. Is anything too hard for the Lord? This was the heart of the entire story. God's promises are not bound by human limitations. Abraham's calling and the covenant with God set the foundation for the entire biblical narrative. Through his journey, we see the struggles of waiting, the tests of faith, and the power of trust in God's promises. Abraham's story is a reminder that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the choice to trust God despite uncertainty. His journey was not perfect. He had moments of weakness, impatience, and mistakes, but God's faithfulness remained constant. The promise of a son was clear, yet years passed and Abraham and Sarah remained childless. The delay weighed heavily on Sarah, who had long endured the shame of barrenness. In ancient times, a woman's worth was often tied to her ability to bear children, especially sons who could carry on the family name. As she aged, Sarah struggled with the growing realization that she might never conceive. Though God had promised Abraham descendants as numerous as the stars, she could not see how that would be possible if she remained barren. Her patience wore thin, and in a moment of desperation, she devised a plan that would change history forever. Sarah proposed that Abraham have a child through Hagar, her Egyptian servant. This was not an unusual custom in their time. If a wife was unable to conceive, it was common for her to offer her maidservant as a surrogate. Any child born to the servant would be considered the legal heir of the wife. But while the plan made sense from a human perspective, it was not God's plan. Nevertheless, Abraham listened to Sarah and agreed. Hagar soon conceived a child, and for the first time, Sarah felt completely replaced. What she thought would be a solution became a source of bitterness. As her pregnancy progressed, Hagar's status shifted. She, once a humble servant, now saw herself as the mother of Abraham's firstborn son, and she began to despise Sarah. Tension grew in Abraham's household, and Sarah lashed out in anger, blaming Abraham for the situation. "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering," she told him. In Genesis 16:5-12, Abraham, caught in the middle, told Sarah to handle Hagar however she wished. Sarah's mistreatment of Hagar became so unbearable that Hagar fled into the wilderness, feeling unwanted, unloved, and abandoned. But God had not forgotten Hagar. In the desert, an angel of the Lord appeared to her, offering words of comfort and hope. "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery." The name Ishmael means God hears, a reminder that even in her suffering, God had not ignored her cries. The angel assured Hagar that Ishmael would become a great nation, but he would live in conflict, described as a wild donkey of a man, constantly at odds with others. Hagar returned to Sarah, and in time she gave birth to Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn son. For a while, it seemed as if Ishmael was the fulfillment of God's promise. Abraham loved Ishmael and raised him as his heir. But this was not God's intended plan. Ishmael was the result of human impatience, not divine promise. Abraham and Sarah had taken matters into their own hands, attempting to force God's timing, but God's ways are higher than human reasoning. 13 years after Ishmael's birth, when Abraham was 99 years old, God appeared again, reaffirming his original promise. "I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers." Despite Abraham's past mistakes, God remained faithful. He reconfirmed the covenant, emphasizing that Sarah, not Hagar, would bear the promised son. "Your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac." In Genesis 17, Abraham's reaction was unfiltered disbelief. He fell face down and laughed. How could a 99-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman have a child? He pleaded with God, saying, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing." Abraham loved Ishmael, and he wanted him to be the chosen one. But God had a different plan. Ishmael would indeed be blessed and become a great nation, but the covenant promise would pass through Isaac, not Ishmael. To seal this covenant, God introduced circumcision as a permanent sign between him and Abraham's descendants. Every male among Abraham's household, including servants and Ishmael, was to be circumcised. This outward mark distinguished Abraham's lineage, setting them apart as God's chosen people. Circumcision became a sign of faith and obedience, representing the cutting away of human reliance and self-sufficiency, replacing it with trust in God's promise. The following year, as God had promised, Sarah conceived. The impossible happened. Her barren womb carried a child, and at 90 years old she gave birth to Isaac. In Genesis 21, when she held him in her arms, she remembered the laughter, her own doubt, Abraham's disbelief, and now her joy. "God has brought me laughter," she said, "and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." Isaac's name, meaning he laughs, became a testimony to God's faithfulness, a reminder that even when humans doubt, God's promises stand firm. But the arrival of Isaac reignited tensions in the household. Ishmael, now a teenager, began mocking Isaac, and Sarah saw him as a threat. In her eyes, Ishmael was no longer the heir. Isaac was the promised child. Fearing for Isaac's future, Sarah demanded that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. Abraham was heartbroken, but God assured him, "Do not be distressed about the boy. I will make him into a great nation." Abraham obeyed, sending Hagar and Ishmael into the wilderness with minimal provisions. When they ran out of water, Hagar placed Ishmael under a bush, unable to watch him die. But God heard Ishmael's cries and appeared once more, providing a well and renewing his promise that Ishmael would father a great nation. Meanwhile, Isaac grew under the favor of God, destined to carry the covenant forward. But before Abraham could see the fulfillment of the promise, he would face the greatest test of his life, the sacrifice of Isaac on Mount Moriah, waiting on God's timing and the dangers of human impatience. The birth of Ishmael was a result of trying to control God's promise through human logic, yet God's faithfulness prevailed despite their missteps. Isaac's birth, on the other hand, was a testimony to God's power, proving that nothing is impossible for him. Ishmael survived, and as he grew, God's promise to him was fulfilled. He became a skilled archer, living in the desert of Paran, and eventually Hagar found him a wife from Egypt. From Ishmael would come 12 princes and the great Arab nations. His life was marked by hardship, but also by divine favor. Though he was not the child of the covenant, he was still the son of Abraham, and God honored that. The departure of Ishmael and Hagar marked the final separation between Abraham's two sons. One was the child of human effort, the other was the child of divine promise. But God, in his mercy, blessed them both. The conflict between Ishmael and Isaac did not end in their lifetimes. It echoed through generations, shaping the histories of nations. Ishmael's descendants and Isaac's descendants would become two great peoples, often at odds with one another. But despite the division, God's hand was at work in both lines. This story is not just about sibling rivalry, it is about God's sovereignty, human impatience, and divine faithfulness. Abraham's love for both his sons was undeniable, but in the end, God's plan prevailed. Isaac, the child of miracle and promise, remained under Abraham's care, while Ishmael, the child of human impatience, was sent into the wilderness, but not forgotten. God's plan was never just about one nation or one lineage, it was about his unfolding purpose for the entire world. Isaac's journey was far from over. He was the child through whom the covenant would continue. But before he could fulfill his destiny, Abraham would face the greatest test of his faith, the command to sacrifice his son. The child of promise, the one through whom God had said he would make Abraham's descendants as numerous as the stars, was finally here. Isaac was not just a son, he was the fulfillment of everything God had spoken. Through Isaac, the covenant would live on. Through Isaac, the future would unfold. Abraham had endured years of waiting, doubting, believing, and rejoicing. And now, just as he was settling into the reality of God's faithfulness, he received a command that was beyond comprehension. God called out to Abraham, and Abraham, ever the obedient servant, responded, "Here I am." Then came the words that must have sent a chill through his soul. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." In Genesis 22, it was a test like no other. Isaac was not only Abraham's beloved son, he was the son God himself had given. And now, God was asking for him back. The command seemed to contradict everything Abraham understood about God. He had followed God for years, left his homeland, trusted the impossible, and witnessed miracles. Would God now take away the very thing he had promised? The request was not just difficult, it was devastating. Child sacrifice was common among the pagan nations, but this was different. This was Yahweh, the God of righteousness and life, asking for the unthinkable. And yet, Abraham did not argue. He did not question. The man who once pleaded for Sodom and Gomorrah, bargaining with God to spare the righteous, said nothing this time. He simply obeyed. Early the next morning, without hesitation, Abraham saddled his donkey, took 2 servants and Isaac, and set out for Mount Moriah. The journey lasted 3 agonizing days. 3 days of walking, of silence, of thoughts racing through his mind. What was Abraham thinking? Did he replay God's promises over and over? Did he wonder if God would intervene? Did he struggle with his emotions, his fears, his love for his son? The Bible does not tell us, but what we do know is that Abraham pressed forward. He did not turn back. He did not delay. He trusted. As they approached the mountain, Abraham gave instructions to his servants, saying, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." It was a curious statement. We will come back. Was this Abraham's faith speaking? Did he believe God would intervene? Did he expect a miracle? Hebrews 11 verse 19 later tells us that Abraham believed God could raise the dead, meaning that even if Isaac was sacrificed, Abraham trusted that God would somehow restore him. This was not blind obedience, it was faith in the impossible. As they ascended the mountain, Isaac carried the wood for the sacrifice. The innocent son, unknowingly walking to his own altar. He noticed something was missing. "Father," he said, "the fire and wood are here, "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" His question must have pierced Abraham's heart. How could he answer? How could he explain? But Abraham's response was filled with faith. God himself will provide the lamb. At the top of the mountain, Abraham built the altar. Every movement must have felt surreal. He arranged the wood just as he had done countless times before. But this time, the sacrifice would be his own son. He turned to Isaac. Did Isaac resist? Did he struggle? The Bible does not say. What we do know is that Isaac was bound and placed on the altar. There is no record of a fight. Isaac was old enough to resist if he wanted to, yet he allowed himself to be bound. This moment was not just about Abraham's faith, it was about Isaac's trust as well. Abraham raised the knife. The moment had come. His hand trembled as he prepared to do the unthinkable. Time must have slowed as he looked at his son, the son of his old age, the one he loved more than life itself. Was this really what God wanted? Every fiber of his being must have screamed to stop, yet he held firm and nice. "Abraham! Abraham!" He froze. The knife stopped in midair, his breath caught. "Here I am," he said. The angel of the Lord spoke. "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Relief must have flooded through him. His hands loosened, the knife fell from his grip, and he turned. And there it was, a ram caught in the thicket. Abraham's faith had been tested, and God had provided. He took the ram and sacrificed it in place of Isaac. It was a moment of profound revelation. God never intended for Isaac to die, but he wanted Abraham's heart. He wanted to see if Abraham truly trusted him above all else. Abraham named the place Jehovah-Jireh, the Lord will provide. The ram in the thicket was not just a replacement, it was a foreshadowing. Centuries later, another father would offer his son. But this time, there would be no voice to stop the sacrifice. On the cross of Calvary, Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, would take the place of sinners. The story of Isaac's near sacrifice was a preview of the greatest act of redemption in history. After the sacrifice, God spoke again, reaffirming his covenant. "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. Through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." This was not just about Abraham's faith, it was about God's plan for the world. Isaac's survival meant that God's covenant continued, leading to the birth of Israel, the coming of Christ, and the salvation of mankind. Abraham and Isaac returned home, forever changed. Isaac was no longer just the child of promise, he was the living proof of God's provision. And Abraham? He had passed the greatest test of faith ever given to a man. He had proven that his trust in God was greater than anything else, even greater than his love for his son. Isaac's life was deeply intertwined with the continuation of God's covenant, a bridge between his father Abraham, the father of faith, and his son Jacob, who would give birth to the 12 tribes of Israel. Though his story is often overshadowed by the dramatic events surrounding his birth and near sacrifice, Isaac played a crucial role in biblical history. He was not just a passive recipient of God's promise, but a key figure in carrying forward the covenant that would shape the destiny of an entire nation. His life was marked by divine provision, patience, and unwavering faith, mirroring the legacy of his father, but also forging his own path in God's redemptive plan. Following the death of Sarah, Abraham became concerned about Isaac's future. Isaac was now a grown man, and the time had come for him to take a wife, a necessary step in fulfilling God's promise of numerous descendants. But Abraham, a man devoted to God's calling, refused to allow his son to marry a Canaanite woman. The Canaanites were known for their idolatry and moral corruption, and Abraham was determined to ensure that the covenant remained pure and untainted by foreign influences. Thus, he summoned his most trusted servant and gave him a solemn mission to travel to Abraham's homeland and find a wife for Isaac from among his own people. This journey would not be just about securing a marriage, it would be about securing the future of the promise. The servant set out on the long journey to Mesopotamia, to the land of Nahor, Abraham's brother. As he approached a well outside the city of Haran, he prayed earnestly for God's guidance. "Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham." In Genesis 26, he asked for a specific sign. that the woman God had chosen for Isaac would offer him water and also water his camels. This was no small request. Watering camels was an arduous task, requiring strength, kindness, and a servant's heart. Before he even finished praying, Rebekah appeared. Rebekah was beautiful, pure, and most importantly, God's chosen bride for Isaac. When the servant asked for water, she not only offered him a drink, but also volunteered to draw water for his camels, fulfilling the very sign he had prayed for. Overwhelmed with gratitude, the servant praised God, knowing that he had led him to the right woman. He then explained his mission to Rebekah's family, offering gifts and speaking of Abraham's wealth and faithfulness. Her family recognized that this was God's will, and though they hesitated at first, Rebekah herself showed remarkable faith. When asked if she was willing to leave immediately and journey to a land she had never seen, to marry a man she had never met, she simply said, "I will go." Her willingness to trust in God's plan mirrored that of Abraham himself, who had once left his homeland on nothing but faith. Rebekah's journey back to Canaan was long, but it ended in a scene of remarkable tenderness. As they approached their destination, Isaac was out in the fields meditating and praying. When he looked up and saw the caravan approaching, Rebekah, seeing Isaac from afar, covered herself with her veil, a sign of her purity and humility. It was love at first sight. Isaac took Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, and she became his wife, bringing him comfort after the loss of his mother. Their marriage was a union ordained by God, a continuation of the divine plan that had begun with Abraham. For years, however, Rebekah remained barren. Just as Sarah had struggled with infertility, so too did Isaac's wife. This was no mere coincidence. It was a pattern of testing and faith that God used to show that the promise was not dependent on human effort, but on divine intervention. Unlike Abraham and Sarah, who had attempted to fulfill God's promise through their own means with Hagar and Ishmael, Isaac took a different approach. Instead of seeking an alternative solution, he prayed. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. His faith and patience stood in contrast to his parents' earlier struggles, showing that he had learned from their mistakes. Rebekah's pregnancy, however, was not ordinary. She felt great turmoil within her womb, and when she sought the Lord, he revealed to her that she was carrying twins. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. This prophecy foretold the lifelong struggle between her 2 sons, Esau and Jacob, and set the stage for another critical phase in the fulfillment of God's covenant. Isaac's life as a patriarch was marked by moments of faith, trials, and divine encounters. He followed in Abraham's footsteps, remaining in Canaan, tending to his flocks, and continuing the legacy of worshiping the one true God. Yet, he also faced his own challenges, particularly with the Philistines. As Isaac prospered, his wealth and influence grew significantly, leading to tensions with the surrounding nations. The Philistines, jealous of his success, filled his wells with dirt, forcing Isaac to move multiple times. Each time, he would dig new wells, and each time, the Philistines would dispute his rights to them. But Isaac, rather than engaging in hostility or war, chose peace. He moved again and again, trusting that God would provide. His patience and trust were rewarded. After several disputes, Isaac finally dug a well in a new location, and this time no one contested it. He named it Rehoboth, meaning now the Lord has given us room and we will flourish in the land. Soon after, God appeared to him and reaffirmed the covenant first given to Abraham, saying, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." Isaac responded by building an altar and calling on the name of the Lord, establishing his own personal relationship with God, independent of his father's. Isaac's role in biblical history was crucial. Though his life may not have been filled with the dramatic events of Abraham or Jacob, he was the steady link in the chain of God's promise. He represented the continuation of faithfulness, a man who prayed instead of schemed, who sought peace instead of conflict, and who trusted God instead of taking matters into his own hands. His life was a testimony to quiet, unwavering faith, showing that sometimes God works not through grand gestures, but through steady obedience. As Isaac aged, he passed the blessing to his son Jacob, continuing the divine plan. The birthright and the promise would move forward, leading ultimately to the nation of Israel, and eventually to Jesus Christ, the ultimate fulfillment of the covenant. The story of Abraham and Isaac is one of the most profound narratives in biblical history, demonstrating faith, trust, divine testing, and God's ultimate provision. It is a story that resonates across generations, teaching us what it truly means to believe in God's promises, to obey even when the path seems uncertain, and to trust in His plan despite our fears. Abraham's journey began with a call to leave everything behind, an act of obedience that set him apart as the father of faith. He faced uncertainty, trials, and years of waiting, yet he remained steadfast in believing that God would do what He had promised. When Isaac was born, it was a testament to God's faithfulness and power, proving that nothing is impossible for Him. But just when it seemed that everything had come to fulfillment, God tested Abraham in the most unimaginable way, by asking him to sacrifice his beloved son. This moment was not just about Abraham's willingness to give up Isaac. It was about proving that his love for God was greater than anything else. And in the end, God provided, revealing that He never intended for Isaac to die, but He wanted Abraham's heart fully surrendered. This story is not just a historical account. It is a lesson for all of us. It teaches us that faith is not merely about believing in good times, but about trusting even when we don't understand. Abraham didn't argue with God, nor did he try to find another way. He simply obeyed. In our own lives, we often face situations where God calls us to step out in faith, to surrender something dear to us, or to walk a path that doesn't make sense. Like Abraham, we must learn that true faith means trusting that God knows best, even when we don't have all the answers. Isaac's role in this story also teaches us something invaluable: submission and trust. He could have resisted, but he didn't. His quiet acceptance reflected a faith that mirrored his father's, showing that obedience to God brings the greatest reward. Another powerful theme in this story is God's provision. Just as God provided a ram in place of Isaac, He continues to provide for His people today. This moment on Mount Moriah was not just about Abraham and Isaac. It was a foreshadowing of a greater sacrifice yet to come. Centuries later, God would offer His own Son, Jesus Christ, as the ultimate sacrifice for sin. But unlike Isaac, there would be no ram to take Jesus' place. This time, the sacrifice would be completed, because God's love for humanity required the greatest offering, His only Son. This connection between Isaac and Jesus reveals that God's plan was never just about one family, but about the redemption of the entire world. Beyond faith and obedience, the story of Abraham and Isaac teaches us about patience. Abraham waited decades for the fulfillment of God's promise, and when it seemed like time had run out, God still came through. Too often, we grow impatient when we don't see immediate results. But this story reminds us that God operates on His own timeline, not ours. What seems delayed to us is actually perfectly timed in God's divine plan. When Abraham and Sarah tried to rush God's promise through Hagar and Ishmael, they created conflict that lasted for generations. This teaches us that taking matters into our own hands instead of waiting on God can lead to unnecessary struggles. But when we trust in His timing, we see His faithfulness unfold in ways greater than we could imagine. Isaac's life, though quieter than Abraham's, was equally significant. He represented the continuation of God's promise, showing that faith must be passed down through generations. He was a man of prayer, patience, and peace, choosing to trust God even in the midst of trials. His story reminds us that sometimes faith is not about dramatic acts, but about quiet consistency, about choosing to believe every single day, even when things seem ordinary. He carried the legacy forward, ensuring that God's covenant remained unbroken. What can we learn from this story in our own lives? First, God will always test the hearts of those He calls. He does not test us to harm us, but to refine us, to make us stronger, and to deepen our faith. Like Abraham, we must be willing to lay everything on the altar, trusting that God's ways are always higher than our own. Second, obedience unlocks the greatest blessings. If Abraham had hesitated, if he had tried to negotiate with God, or if he had refused to go to Mount Moriah, he would have missed out on the greatest confirmation of his faith. Sometimes our greatest moments of breakthrough come right after our greatest moments of testing. Third, we learn that God is always faithful to his promises. He does not lie, he does not forget, and he does not fail. If he has spoken a word over your life, he will bring it to pass, even if it takes time. Another crucial lesson is that God provides exactly what we need at the right time. Abraham did not see the ram before he stepped out in obedience, but the moment he needed it, God provided. This is how God works. He calls us to trust first, to walk by faith, and then he supplies everything we need. If you are facing a situation today where you don't see the answer yet, remember that God already has the provision waiting for you. You just need to keep moving forward. This story also challenges us to examine our own faith. Do we trust God with everything, or are we holding back? Are we willing to let go of the things we cherish most if God asks us to? Are we truly surrendered to his will? Abraham's journey reminds us that the closer we walk with God, the more he calls us to deeper levels of trust and obedience. But with every test, there is a greater revelation of who God is. With every act of faith, we come to know him more intimately. As we reflect on this powerful story, let it inspire us to walk by faith, even when we don't understand. Let it remind us that God's plans are bigger than we can see, and that his provision is always waiting just beyond our obedience. No matter what we face, no matter what trials come our way, God is with us, guiding us, testing us, and ultimately blessing us. Abraham's faith was counted as righteousness, and that same righteousness is available to us when we trust in Jesus Christ, the true sacrifice who was provided in our place. If you have been blessed by this incredible journey through the story of Abraham and Isaac, I invite you to subscribe for more deep, insightful Bible teachings that bring Scripture to life. There is so much more to uncover, and I would love for you to continue this journey with us. Like, share, and comment with your thoughts. What did this story teach you about faith, trust, and obedience? Your engagement helps spread these powerful messages to more people who need encouragement and truth. Thank you for watching, listening, and being part of this incredible exploration of faith. I appreciate every one of you, and I pray that this story strengthens your own walk with God. May you trust him completely, walk in obedience, and always remember that he is Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. Stay blessed, and I'll see you in the next video.